My name is Mackenzie Carter, and at 28, I never imagined my homecoming would end like this. The Christmas tree lights twinkled in the corner, casting shadows across the dining room table where my father slammed his fist down. 10 years of military service, a combat injury that still made my leg throb, and every single paycheck sent home. None of it mattered now. His face contorted with rage as he spat the words that shattered my world. "You're a burden. Get out of my house." The room fell silent. After everything I had sacrificed, I was being thrown away like trash. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Trust me, you'll want to hear how I turned this betrayal into the wake-up call my father never saw coming. Growing up, it was just Dad and me in our small two-bedroom house on the edge of town. My mother left when I was 5, and Dad never missed an opportunity to remind me how she abandoned us for a better life. The early years weren't so bad. Dad coached my softball team, helped with science projects, and worked overtime at the factory to keep food on the table. I remember his tired smile when I'd wait up for him, how he'd tousle my hair and call me his little soldier. That changed when I hit 13. Dad started staying out later, coming home smelling of whiskey and cheap perfume. Our conversations shortened to grunts and nods. The refrigerator emptied more frequently, and my school lunch money became borrowed more often than not. I took a job at the local diner, working weekends and after school to help with bills. Dad called it building character, but I knew it was survival. The only real parenting I received came during summer visits to Grandpa Jack's farm, 3 hours north in rural Pennsylvania. Grandpa taught me about hard work, integrity, and respect. His weathered hands guided mine as we fixed fences, tended animals, and harvested vegetables. A person's worth isn't in what they take, he'd say, but in what they give when no one's looking. Those summers were my sanctuary, the place I felt truly at home. By senior year, Dad's drinking had worsened, and our house was constantly in danger of foreclosure. I'd find past due notices hidden in drawers and would empty my savings to cover what I could. College wasn't an option, we couldn't afford it, and Dad needed my income. When the military recruiter visited our high school, I saw my opportunity. Military service? Are you trying to kill me with worry? Dad complained when I brought home the paperwork. But his tune changed when I mentioned the signing bonus and steady paycheck. "Well, maybe it would teach you some discipline," he conceded, eyeing the benefits package. I enlisted a week after graduation. Basic training was brutal but transformative. For the first time, I excelled at something. My drill sergeant noticed my determination and recommended me for specialized training. I advanced quickly, finding purpose in the structure and camaraderie. Every month, I sent money home, first half my paycheck, then nearly all of it as I moved up in rank. Dad's calls grew warmer, full of praise for his hero daughter and updates about home improvements he was making with my money. My unit deployed 3 times, twice to Afghanistan and once to Iraq. During my second tour, I met Thomas, a communications specialist with kind eyes and a quiet strength. We planned a future together until an IED took his life and left me with shrapnel in my right leg and hip. The physical therapy was excruciating, but the loss of Thomas hurt more. Still, I sent money home. Dad talked about needing a new truck, roof repairs, and helping with investments. I wanted to believe I was taking care of him, even from thousands of miles away. After 10 years of service, the doctors determined my injuries would prevent me from meeting physical requirements for continued duty. With an honorable discharge and a medical retirement plan, I headed home, expecting to find the renovated house my money had supposedly improved. Instead, I found my childhood home with the same sagging porch and peeling paint, but parked outside was a brand new SUV I'd never seen before. Inside, unfamiliar furniture filled the living room, and framed photos showcased people I didn't recognize. That's how I discovered Dad had remarried 3 years earlier to Barbara, a woman he'd never mentioned in our calls. She had a daughter named Caitlin, now 19, who glared at me like I was an intruder. "Mackenzie, you remember I mentioned Barbara," Dad said, though he never had. "And this is your stepsister, Caitlin. They moved in after we got married. Didn't I tell you?" The guest room, once my bedroom, was now Caitlin's art studio, filled with expensive supplies and half-finished canvases. I would be sleeping on the pull-out couch in the basement, surrounded by boxes of my childhood things Dad had never bothered to unpack. That first week home, I discovered the truth about my financial support. The house repairs never happened. My money had financed Barbara's interior decorating business, Caitlin's semester abroad in Italy, and Dad's new position as investor at the local bar. Meanwhile, they acted as if my military pension and disability checks were now the family income. "When will you be well enough to work again?" Barbara asked over breakfast one morning. "These medical bills must be such a burden on your father." Medical bills my military insurance covered. Bills that wouldn't exist if I hadn't been serving my country while they redecorated my home and erased my existence. "Dad mentioned you might be depressed," Caitlin commented another day, examining her manicure. "Lots of veterans are, right? Maybe you should get help instead of moping around the house all day." Moping meant physical therapy exercises and applying for veteran transition programs. Apparently, my combat nightmares were also inconveniencing everyone by disrupting their sleep. As Christmas approached, tensions grew. Barbara complained about my clutter in the basement. Dad winced whenever I used my cane, as if my injury embarrassed him. Caitlin made snide remarks about government handouts while wearing designer clothes my military checks had likely purchased. I tried to contribute by cooking meals and helping with housework, but Barbara would redo everything, claiming I didn't do it right. When I offered to help pay for Christmas dinner, Dad patted my hand condescendingly and said, "Save your money, kiddo. You'll need it when you figure out what to do with yourself." As if I hadn't spent the last decade figuring out how to keep him financially afloat. By Christmas Eve, I was sleeping with my duffel bag packed beside me, sensing the fragile facade of family was about to shatter. I just didn't know how badly. Christmas morning arrived with forced cheer and passive-aggressive comments. Barbara bustled around the kitchen, shooting irritated glances my way whenever I offered to help. Caitlin sprawled on the couch, absorbed in her new laptop, an early gift from Daddy, while complaining that the model was already outdated. I'd spent weeks searching for thoughtful presents despite my limited funds. For Dad, I found a vintage pocket knife similar to one his father had given him. For Barbara, I bought a handcrafted ceramic serving dish from a local artist. For Caitlin, I'd spent hours making a photo album of her childhood pictures I'd discovered in the basement. Their gifts to me? A generic gift card to a store I never shopped at and a self-help book titled Transitioning to Civilian Life, Overcoming Dependency. Barbara picked it out, Dad said with a shrug. "Thought it might help you figure things out." I bit my tongue and thanked them, tucking the book under the couch while they weren't looking. Around noon, guests began arriving for Christmas dinner. Dad's work friends, Barbara's clients, and Caitlin's boyfriend Troy, a business major who immediately cornered me with questions about killing terrorists. I escaped to the kitchen where Barbara was arranging appetizers. "Could you at least try to socialize?" she hissed. "These are important connections for your father. Stop making everything about your situation." My situation being that I was a combat veteran with PTSD and physical injuries, home for the first time in years. As we gathered around the table, an antique mahogany piece Barbara had simply had to have, Dad stood to carve the turkey, beaming with unearned pride. "Before we eat, I want to thank everyone for coming," he announced. "It's been a big year for our family. Barbara's business is thriving," Caitlin made the dean's list. "And I've recently become a partner in a promising investment opportunity." He paused, and for a moment, I thought he might acknowledge my service or homecoming. Instead, he raised his glass higher. "To success and new beginnings." Everyone clinked glasses. I sipped my water silently. Dad, I said during a lull in conversation, I was thinking of using some of my savings to take a small business course at the community college. The VA has a program that. Always looking for handouts, he muttered. Loud enough for others to hear. Military teaches that, I guess. Everything provided for you. The table fell awkwardly silent. That's not what I meant, I said carefully. The VA offers resources to help veterans transition to. Transition, he mocked. That's all we hear about. Meanwhile, you're living under my roof, eating our food. Not contributing. I felt heat rise to my face. I've offered to pay rent, buy groceries. With what? Your disability checks? Money you get for doing nothing now. Barbara touched his arm. Richard, maybe not at dinner. No, let's talk about it, Dad continued, warming to his audience. 10 years in the military, and what do you have to show for it? A bum leg and nightmares that wake up the whole house. I gripped my water glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. I sent money home every month for 10 years. Almost every penny I earned. Child support, he scoffed. For raising you. That's what parents are owed. Owed? I repeated incredulously. I was an adult, serving my country. That money was to help with bills. House repairs. Your father managed this household just fine, Barbara interjected. Any support you sent was a drop in the bucket compared to what he's provided. Caitlin smirked. Yeah. It's not like your army money paid for anything important. I looked at her designer watch, then at Barbara's diamond earrings, then at Dad's expensive golf clubs leaning against the wall. What exactly did happen to that money, Dad? I asked quietly. The table went deadly silent. Dad's face reddened. I don't answer to you about finances. Not in my house. The house my money helped keep, I countered. He slammed his hand down, making dishes jump. Enough. You come back here, broken and useless, expecting everything handed to you. You're a burden, Mackenzie. A goddamn burden on this family. I flinched as if he'd struck me. The dinner guests stared at their plates. If that's how you feel, Dad continued, his voice rising. Then get out of my house. Go find somewhere else to play the victim. In that moment, something inside me, something that had been bending for years, finally broke. But instead of shattering, I felt a strange clarity. I placed my napkin beside my untouched plate and stood, my injured leg protesting. You know what, Dad? You're right about one thing. I don't belong here. I looked around the table at the strangers wearing expensive clothes and uncomfortable expressions. I've spent 10 years sending money home, believing I was helping my family. I see now there is no family here, just people taking advantage of someone who was naive enough to trust them. Dad stood, pointing toward the door. Get your things and get out. Tonight. Richard, one of his friends, murmured, It's Christmas. And it's snowing. Her choice, Dad snapped. Always has to make a scene. I walked from the dining room with as much dignity as my limp allowed. In the basement, I packed quickly clothes, medications, my military documents, and the few mementos I couldn't bear to leave behind. My service medals, a photo of my unit, Thomas's last letter. When I came upstairs, dinner had resumed as if nothing had happened. Only Caitlin's boyfriend met my eyes, looking vaguely ashamed. At the door, I paused. Dad sat at the head of the table, refilling wine glasses, already laughing at something Barbara had said. Merry Christmas, I said to no one in particular, and stepped out into the swirling snow. The biting December wind cut through my jacket as I trudged away from the house. Duffel bag slung painfully over my shoulder. Snow soaked into my boots, and my injured leg screamed with each step. 3 blocks away, I finally stopped under a street lamp. The reality of my situation crashing down. Homeless on Christmas Day. Not exactly the homecoming I'd imagined during those long nights in the barracks. I pulled out my phone, hesitating over the contacts. Who could I call? Most of my high school friends had moved away. My military buddies were scattered across the country or still deployed. And I had too much pride to let them hear the tremor in my voice. There was only one place I could think to go, Grandpa Jack's farm. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. Not since Dad started relaying messages instead of letting me call directly. Would he even welcome me? Did he still live alone on that old farm, or had age forced him into some facility? The walk to the bus station took nearly an hour. My military training had prepared me for physical hardship, but the cold aggravated my injuries until each step became an exercise in willpower. I focused on the rhythm, breathe in, step, breathe out, step, the same way I'd pushed through training exercises and rehabilitation. The station was deserted except for a middle-aged attendant who looked up from his newspaper with surprise when I entered. "Merry Christmas," he said automatically, then noticed my limp and duffel bag. His expression softened. "You all right, miss?" "Need a ticket to Riverdale," I said, naming the small town nearest to Grandpa's farm. "When's the next bus?" He checked his schedule. "Got one leaving in 20 minutes. Last one today." He studied me more carefully, eyes lingering on my military-issue duffel. "Military?" I nodded. "Army. 10 years. Just discharged." He pushed the ticket across the counter and waved away my money. "My son's in the Marines." Consider it a Christmas gift from one military family to another. The simple kindness nearly broke me after the day's events. I thanked him and found a seat in the waiting area, fighting back tears. The bus was nearly empty, just me, an elderly couple, and a man in his 30s wearing a Vietnam veteran cap. As we pulled away from the station, I watched my hometown disappear behind curtains of snow, feeling both relief and a deep, aching loss. 3 hours on a bus with a throbbing leg gives you plenty of time to think. I remembered my first deployment, how scared I'd been beneath my brave face. I thought about Thomas, who'd planned to start a security business after his service. "We'll hire other vets," he'd said. "Create our own family of people who understand." Now he was gone, and I was alone. Or was I? The man in the veteran cap caught my eye across the aisle. "Where you headed, soldier?" "My grandfather's farm," I replied. "If he's still there." He nodded as if this made perfect sense. Coming home's the hardest deployment of all. Nobody tells you that. "Did you find it easier?" I asked. "Coming back?" He gave a humorless laugh. "Hell no. Took me 15 years and 2 divorces to figure it out." He studied me. "Combat?" "Afghanistan." "You?" "Iraq. First wave." He extended his hand. "Marcus." "Mackenzie." "Let me guess." He said, "Family doesn't get it." I laughed bitterly. Family doesn't want to get it. My father just kicked me out. On Christmas. Marcus didn't look surprised. My old man couldn't handle it either. Wanted the hero son, not the broken one who came back. "I'm not broken," I said automatically, the words feeling hollow even to me. "Course not. Just bent in new places." He smiled. "The civilians who matter will figure that out. The rest," he shrugged. "They don't deserve what we gave up." We talked for the remainder of the journey, about deployments, about readjustment, about the strange feeling of being foreigners in our own country. When he departed at a stop before mine, he scribbled a number on a napkin. "VA support group. Meets Thursdays. If you're ever back this way, we've got your 6. The bus pulled into Riverdale just after 9 p.m. The tiny station was closed for the holiday, the town dark except for Christmas lights glowing in windows. 3 inches of fresh snow covered the sidewalks and more was falling. Grandpa's farm lay 7 miles outside town. In summer, I might have walked it despite my injury, but in this weather, I surveyed the deserted main street, weighing my options. A pickup truck idled outside the only open establishment, a diner with open Christmas, hot coffee blinking in the window. I approached carefully, relieved to see an older woman behind the wheel. "Excuse me," I called. "Any chance you're heading toward the Carter farm?" "Jack Carter's place." The woman rolled down her window, eyeing me suspiciously before recognition dawned. "You're Jackie's granddaughter." The military girl. She unlocked the passenger door. Hop in. I'm Ruth from the bakery. Used to deliver bread out to your grandpa every Tuesday. The warmth of the truck was blissful. As we drove, Ruth filled me in on local gossip and, more importantly, on Grandpa. Still stubborn as ever, your grandfather. Refuses to sell that farm though developers keep offering. Says he's keeping it in the family. She glanced at me. He'll be happy to see you. Talks about you all the time. Shows everyone your pictures. My heart clenched. When did you last see him? Week ago. Brought him a Christmas pie. He seemed fine, maybe a bit lonelier than usual. Relief washed over me. He was alive, still on the farm, and apparently still thought of me. One relationship, at least, that hadn't been poisoned. Ruth turned down the long gravel drive leading to the farmhouse. Through the swirling snow, I could make out a single light burning in the kitchen window. Home, or the closest thing to it I had left. Want me to wait? Ruth asked as I gathered my bag. Make sure he's up. I shook my head. I'll be fine. Thank you for the ride. Merry Christmas, soldier, she said, and with a wave, drove back toward town. The walk from driveway to porch felt longer than any march I'd endured in basic training. Each step sank into deep snow, my leg protesting fiercely. By the time I reached the door, sweat dampened my clothes despite the cold. I stood there, suddenly afraid. What if he didn't want me either? What if Dad had poisoned this relationship too? Before I could knock, the porch light flicked on. The door opened to reveal Grandpa Jack, thinner and more stooped than I remembered, but with the same kind eyes. Mackenzie, he whispered, as if afraid I might be a ghost. Merry Christmas, Grandpa, I managed, before my voice broke completely. He pulled me into a fierce hug, and for the first time since coming home, I felt like I'd actually arrived. Grandpa's kitchen was exactly as I remembered, the ancient wood stove, the checked curtains, the scarred oak table where I'd eaten countless summer breakfasts. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with the handmade ornaments I'd crafted as a child. He'd kept them all these years. Sit, he insisted, taking my duffel and helping me to a chair. You're frozen through. Let me get you something hot. While he bustled around preparing cocoa, the same way he had when I was 8, I took in the familiar surroundings. Photos lined the walls, me in my softball uniform, my graduation picture, and several of me in military dress. A framed newspaper clipping about my unit's humanitarian mission in Afghanistan. My college acceptance letters, ones I'd never been able to use, preserved behind glass. You've been keeping tabs on me, I observed, throat tight with emotion. Course I have. He set a steaming mug before me. You're all the family that matters to me. The simple statement, so at odds with the day's earlier rejection, broke something inside me. I told him everything, the years of sending money home, my injury, Thomas's death, and finally, the disastrous Christmas dinner. Grandpa listened without interruption, his weathered face growing increasingly troubled. He threw you out? His own daughter? On Christmas? His hands shook with anger. After all you've done? Apparently I'm a burden now, I said, trying for humor but failing miserably. Not contributing enough. Grandpa stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen with surprising energy for a man his age. 10 years of paychecks. Combat service. And he has the nerve to call you a burden. He disappeared into his study, returning with a stack of envelopes bound with twine. I've been waiting for the right time to show you these. Guess that time is now. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. Dozens of letters addressed to me, spanning years. With trembling hands, I opened the earliest one, dated just weeks after she supposedly abandoned us. My dearest Mackenzie, it began. I know your father is telling you I left because I didn't want you. Nothing could be further from the truth. The court gave him temporary custody while I established a stable home for us. I'll be coming for you as soon as the judge approves my petition. Letter after letter told a different story than the one I'd been raised on. My mother hadn't abandoned us, she'd been fighting for custody. She'd sent child support, arranged visitation, called regularly. All intercepted by my father. She tried for years. Grandpa said gently. Richard threatened her, told her if she persisted, he'd take you and disappear. Eventually, she backed off, hoping you'd reach out when you were older. But I never knew. I whispered. He told me she wanted nothing to do with me. She moved to Colorado eventually, started teaching at a community college. Sent birthday cards every year. Christmas presents too. I thought of all the birthdays without acknowledgement, the Christmases where Dad claimed my mother couldn't be bothered to remember me. Did you know? I asked. A hint of accusation in my voice. All these years. Grandpa's shoulders slumped. Not at first. Richard cut me off too after Helen left. Said I took her side. It wasn't until you joined the military that I started piecing it together. Helen contacted me, wanting to know if the Mackenzie Carter who made the news for saving those children in Kandahar was her daughter. She saw that. Kept every article about you. Was so proud. His voice cracked. We reconnected then, started comparing notes. The lies became clear. A terrible thought struck me. Is Sheesh can I? Grandpa's face fell. She passed 2 years ago, Mac. Cancer. It was quick, they said. The room spun around me. My mother, the woman I'd been raised to resent, even hate, had loved me all along. Had tried to be part of my life. And now she was gone. Forever, without me ever knowing the truth. There's more, Grandpa said hesitantly. About the money you sent home. Of course there was. The night of revelations wasn't finished with me yet. Your mother's parents, your other grandparents, left you a trust fund for college. Richard was trustee until you turned 25. He drained it the moment you enlisted. How much? I asked numbly. Almost $70,000. The room tilted. $70,000 that could have funded my education, helped start a civilian career, provided security. Gone. And the money I sent home, near as Helen could figure from the bank statements she got in the divorce settlement, he was taking out loans in your name while you were deployed. Using your power of attorney. The money you sent home went to paying those off and financing his lifestyle. My father hadn't just rejected me, he'd been systematically exploiting me for years. Using my trust, my absence, and my sense of familial duty to steal my past and mortgage my future. Grandpa pulled out one final document, my mother's will. She left everything to you. Her house in Colorado, her savings, her personal effects. It's not a fortune, but it's something. A fresh start, maybe? I stared at the papers before me, evidence of a life I should have known. Relationships I should have had, opportunities stolen from me by the person I trusted most. Why tell me now? I asked. Why not years ago? I tried, Mackenzie. Every time you visited. I tried to broach the subject. But Richard always had an excuse for why you couldn't call me directly afterward. Then your deployment made communication difficult. By the time I realized he was intercepting my letters too, you were in Afghanistan with spotty contact at best. The betrayal was so complete, so methodically executed over decades, that I couldn't process it. My entire understanding of my life, my family, my choices, all built on elaborate lies. I have one more thing, Grandpa said, reaching into a drawer. He withdrew a small jewelry box and placed it in my palm. Your mother wanted you to have this. Inside was a delicate silver pendant, a compass rose on a fine chain. To help you find your way. Grandpa explained. She always believed you would, eventually. I closed my fingers around the necklace, feeling the weight of lost time and stolen connection. Years I could never recover. A relationship destroyed by one man's selfishness. That night, I read every letter by lamplight, absorbing my mother's words, her love, her persistence in the face of cruel obstruction. When dawn broke, I finally fell into exhausted sleep, the compass pendant clutched in my hand, a talisman connecting me to the mother I'd never truly known. I spent the next week in a fog of grief and rage. Some mornings, I could barely rise from bed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of my father's betrayal. Other days, I paced Grandpa's property for hours, my injured leg protesting, but unable to match the pain in my heart. She tried to call on your 18th birthday. Grandpa told me over breakfast one morning. Richard told her you'd said you wanted nothing to do with her. Each new revelation was another wound. My mother had been alive for 8 years of my adult life, years when I could have known her, loved her, learned from her, and my father had stolen that from both of us. The more I learned, the more questions emerged. Why had Dad intercepted Grandpa's letters and calls? Why construct such an elaborate web of lies? The answer, when it came to me, was devastatingly simple: control. Control over me, over my loyalty, over my money. 10 days after Christmas, I drove Grandpa's truck to the county seat to meet with his friend Edmund, a semi-retired lawyer who specialized in financial fraud, identity theft, misappropriation of funds, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. Edmund listed, reviewing the documents I'd brought. Your father's been busy, Mackenzie. Can anything be done? I asked. Legally? Absolutely. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on most of these offenses. He removed his glasses. The question is whether you want to pursue it. Criminal charges would mean a public trial, possibly jail time for your father. The thought should have satisfied me, but it left me hollow. I don't want revenge. I want my life back. Edmund nodded. Then we focus on financial recovery. Force him to repay what he stole. Clear your credit, which he's thoroughly damaged. We spent hours documenting the fraud, loans taken in my name, credit cards I'd never seen, the misappropriated trust fund, and the military paychecks that had disappeared into accounts I couldn't access. While Edmund worked on legal paperwork, I drove to Colorado. I needed to see where my mother had lived, to connect with the life that should have intersected with mine. Her house was a modest bungalow on a quiet street, currently unoccupied. Neighbors told me she'd been a beloved community college professor, active in local causes and a mentor to struggling students. She talked about her daughter in the military. One elderly neighbor confided, "So proud, but so sad too. Said there'd been a terrible misunderstanding that kept you apart." I visited her grave. A simple marker in a peaceful cemetery with a view of the mountains. Someone her friends, I learned later, had placed fresh flowers despite the winter weather. I added my own, along with a letter telling her everything I wished I could have said in person. Returning to Grandpa's farm, I found new purpose emerging from grief. I contacted my former commanding officer, who connected me with a veterans advocacy group specializing in financial abuse cases. My situation, they informed me, wasn't unique. Predatory family members often targeted deployed service members, counting on distance and limited communication to cover their tracks. Your father counted on your loyalty, my advocate explained, and on military culture, which emphasizes family support and doesn't always prepare service members for financial self-protection. With their help, I began untangling the web. Credit bureaus flagged the fraudulent accounts. Military legal aid helped document the timeline of theft. Edmund prepared civil proceedings to recover the trust fund. I also reached out to Marcus, the veteran I'd met on the bus. His support group connected me with trauma resources I'd been too proud to seek before. In their company, I found people who understood both my military experiences and my sense of civilian displacement. Family isn't always blood, a female Marine told me during one session. Sometimes it's who stands by you when the smoke clears. Looking around at these strangers who'd become allies, Grandpa brewing coffee in the kitchen, Edmund reviewing documents at the table, Marcus checking in daily, I began to understand what she meant. The plan came together piece by piece. Edmund would file civil charges demanding restitution. The veterans group would handle credit recovery. I would confront my father face to face, not for reconciliation, but for closure. Are you sure you want to do this in person? Grandpa asked the night before I was scheduled to return to my hometown. Edmund can handle everything legally without you facing Richard. I fastened my mother's compass pendant around my neck. I need to look him in the eye, Grandpa. Not just for me, but for Mom. Someone needs to make him acknowledge what he did to both of us. That night, I dreamed of Thomas. We were back in Afghanistan, watching children play in a schoolyard our unit had helped rebuild. The thing about betrayal, Dream Thomas said, is that it only defines you if you let it. I woke with tears on my face, but clarity in my heart. This confrontation wasn't about hatred or revenge. It was about reclaiming my narrative, my future, and my truth. The next morning, I packed Grandpa's truck with the evidence Edmund had prepared. Legal documents, financial records, my mother's letters, physical proof of years of manipulation and theft. Remember, Grandpa said, embracing me before I left. Whatever happens, you have a home here. Always. With my mother's compass around my neck and my grandfather's support behind me, I drove toward confrontation and, I hoped, toward freedom from the lies that had shaped my life for too long. The insurance office where my father worked looked smaller than I remembered. A nondescript building on the town's main street. I parked Grandpa's truck across the street, watching people enter and exit, wondering if they knew the kind of man who processed their claims and calculated their premiums. Edmund sat beside me, briefcase on his lap. We can still do this through official channels. He reminded me, you don't have to face him. Yes, I do. I fingered the compass pendant at my neck. For 23 years, he controlled the narrative. Today, I take it back. We entered the building at precisely 2:15 p.m. when Dad would be returning from lunch, but before his afternoon appointments. The receptionist, a new hire who wouldn't recognize me, smiled professionally. Richard Carter, please. Tell him his daughter and Edmund Lawson are here. Her eyes widened slightly at Edmund Lawson, the most prominent attorney in the county. One moment. Dad appeared minutes later, his confident stride faltering when he saw me. His eyes darted between my face and Edmund's briefcase. Mackenzie, he said cautiously. This is unexpected. Is there somewhere private we can talk? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He led us to a conference room, closing the door with deliberate care. If this is about Christmas, I may have overreacted. Barbara and I discussed it. And we agree you could come back, with certain conditions. This isn't about Christmas, I interrupted. This is about 23 years of lies. Edmund placed his briefcase on the table and began methodically removing documents. Mr. Carter, he said formally, I represent your daughter in matters concerning financial fraud, identity theft, and misappropriation of funds. We're prepared to file both civil and criminal charges unless you agree to immediate restitution. Dad's face drained of color. What is this nonsense? Mackenzie, you can't be serious. I've seen the letters, I said quietly. All of them. Mom's letters that you hid from me. Her child support checks you cashed. The custody agreement you violated. He sank into a chair. That woman abandoned us. I was protecting you. Protecting me. I pushed forward a stack of financial documents. By stealing my college fund? By taking out loans in my name while I was deployed? By pocketing my military paychecks for a decade? I'm your father. That money was for family needs. Like Barbara's business? Caitlin's semester abroad? Your gambling debts? I shook my head. I've seen the bank records, Dad. All of them. For a moment, I glimpsed panic in his eyes before he attempted recovery. There are explanations for all of this. Misunderstandings. Edmund, surely as a father yourself. Save it, Edmund interrupted. The evidence is overwhelming. Your daughter has 3 options for you. Face criminal charges, which would mean public trial and likely imprisonment. Fight a civil suit, which you'll lose, resulting in wage garnishment and asset seizure, or agree to our settlement terms. Dad's face hardened. You wouldn't dare. The scandal would hurt you as much as me. That's where you're wrong, I said. I've got nothing left to lose. You made sure of that on Christmas Day. I pushed forward the settlement agreement Edmund had prepared. Full financial restitution. Transfer of house ownership to me, since my money had paid the mortgage for years. A legally binding admission of the fraud he'd committed. You expect me to sign away everything? Become destitute? Dad sputtered. I expect you to repay what you stole, I corrected. The house alone is worth more than you took. Sell it, downsize, get a second job, figure it out. And if I refuse? Edmund calmly placed a second document on the table. Then I file this with the district attorney today. Financial crimes against military personnel carry enhanced penalties. You'd face up to 15 years. Dad stared at the papers, his facade crumbling. I need time to think. To consult my own lawyer. You have 24 hours, Edmund stated. After that, we proceed with criminal charges. As we stood to leave, Dad made one last desperate attempt. Mackenzie. We're family. Despite everything, I raised you. That counts for something. I paused at the door, the weight of 2 decades of lies heavy between us. Yes, you raised me. You taught me that family is about loyalty and sacrifice. I spent years living that lesson, sending every spare dollar home to support you. My voice remained steady as I delivered the final blow. What you didn't teach me, what Mom would have if you'd let her, is that love isn't supposed to be transactional. It doesn't keep score or demand payment. His face flushed with anger or shame, perhaps both. You have no idea what I sacrificed. Save it for your statement to the DA, I said, and walked out. The next 24 hours passed in tense waiting. I stayed at a hotel, unwilling to face the house that held so many distorted memories. Edmund called mid-afternoon the following day. He's agreed to the settlement. His lawyer tried to negotiate, but when I mentioned the additional evidence from your grandfather, they capitulated. Relief washed over me. So it's done? The financial part, yes. The emotional part, Edmund sighed. That's beyond my expertise. I returned to the insurance office to sign the final paperwork. Dad appeared haggard. Barbara beside him looking shell-shocked. You've destroyed us, she hissed. Are you satisfied? I met her gaze calmly. I didn't destroy anything. I'm simply reclaiming what was stolen from me. The signing took less than 10 minutes. No one spoke beyond the necessary legal acknowledgments. As we prepared to leave, a commotion at the door drew our attention. Caitlin burst in, eyes red from crying. Is it true? She demanded. Everything Mackenzie said. Dad wouldn't meet her eyes. Barbara attempted intervention. Caitlin, this doesn't concern. Tell me, she insisted. The money for my schooling, my trip to Italy, was it all stolen from her? The silence was answer enough. Caitlin turned to me, devastation clear on her face. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Looking at her, barely 20, sheltered. Privileged, I saw someone else my father had manipulated, albeit differently. I believe you, I said simply. News travels fast in small towns. By evening, the story had spread. The decorated veteran daughter, the financial fraud, the hidden letters. Dad's colleagues avoided him. Barbara's clients canceled orders. Former neighbors approached me with awkward apologies for not seeing what was happening. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a hollow relief that the truth was finally exposed. The house would be sold, the debts repaid, my credit restored. The legal system could address the financial wounds, but the emotional ones would take longer to heal. 3 days later, as I prepared to return to Grandpa's farm, Caitlin appeared at my hotel room. I sold these, she said, handing me an envelope. Inside was nearly $5,000. My jewelry. Designer clothes, the laptop. It's not everything, but it's a start. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Her eyes, so like our father's, held genuine remorse. I benefited from what he took from you. I want to make it right. I considered the young woman before me, technically my stepsister, practically a stranger, yet connected by the same man's betrayal. Keep the money, I said. Use it for community college tuition. Build your own life, independent from his influence. How can you not hate me? She asked, bewildered. Hating you would give him one more thing he's taken from me, I replied. I'm done letting him take anything. As I drove out of town the next morning, I passed the house where I'd grown up. A for sale sign already stood in the yard. Dad's new SUV was gone, replaced by an older model sedan. The physical trappings of his fraud were being dismantled, piece by piece. I felt no triumph, no vengeful satisfaction, only the quiet certainty that I'd finally broken free of the lies that had shaped my life. The legal victory wasn't about punishment, but liberation. For the first time since my discharge, I looked toward the future without the weight of false obligation or manipulated loyalty. The road to Grandpa's farm stretched before me and beyond it. Possibilities I was finally free to explore. 6 months after the confrontation with my father, I stood on the porch of my mother's Colorado home, now my home, watching summer storms roll across the distant mountains. The compass pendant hung around my neck, a constant connection to the mother I'd never truly known, but was coming to understand through her possessions, her friends, and the life she'd built here. My physical recovery had progressed steadily. The limp remained, but the pain had diminished to an occasional reminder rather than a constant presence. The VA hospital in Denver provided excellent care, and weekly physical therapy sessions helped me rebuild strength I'd thought permanently lost. The emotional healing proved more challenging, but equally possible. Twice weekly, I attended a support group for veterans transitioning to civilian life. There, I found people who understood both the trauma of combat and the disorientation of homecoming. We spoke a common language of experiences civilians couldn't fully comprehend. The hardest deployment is the one back home, Marcus had said on that Christmas bus ride. I finally understood what he meant, and also that this deployment, like all others, could be navigated with the right support and mission parameters. My new mission had taken shape gradually, transforming my mother's modest property into a transition home for female veterans. The house had 3 spare bedrooms, a large yard, and a detached studio perfect for skills training. With the restitution money from my father and a grant from a veterans organization, renovations were nearly complete. Compass House, I'd named it, in honor of my mother's gift. A place to help women warriors find their direction after service. Grandpa Jack visited monthly, bringing seedlings from his farm for the vegetable garden we'd started. At 76, he remained surprisingly spry, though I'd convinced him to hire part-time help for the heavier farm work. Your mother would be proud, he told me during his last visit, surveying the transformation of both property and proprietor. Not just of what you're building, but of how you've handled everything. I wish I'd known her, I said, a familiar ache of loss tempering the day's accomplishments. You're getting to know her now, he replied, gesturing to the community of her friends who'd become my supporters. And she's getting to know you through what you're creating here. The settlement with my father had been finalized 3 months earlier. The house sold for less than expected in a down market, but combined with his liquidated investments and retirement accounts, it covered most of what he'd stolen. A payment plan would address the remainder over 5 years. I hadn't spoken to him since the confrontation, though Caitlin kept me updated. She'd moved into a small apartment, enrolled in community college, and found part-time work at a local art gallery. Barbara had filed for divorce after discovering additional financial deceptions. Dad had relocated to another state, starting over with diminished prospects and a damaged reputation. I felt no pleasure in his downfall, only relief at being free from his influence. Some days, anger still flared, for my lost relationship with my mother, for the years of manipulation, for the fundamental betrayal of parental trust. My therapist assured me this was normal, part of the grieving process for what should have been. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, she reminded me during sessions. It means releasing the power the injury has over you. I was working on it day by day. The renovation contractor's truck pulled into the driveway, interrupting my reflections. The final inspection for Compass House was scheduled for today. If approved, we could welcome our first residents next month, 3 female veterans transitioning from military service to civilian careers. As I turned to greet the contractor, my phone chimed with a message from Caitlin, found more of Helen's photos in Dad's storage unit. Dropping them at Grandpa's next week. Thought you should have them. Another piece of my mother. Another connection restored. The work of reclaiming my past continued alongside building my future. That evening, I hosted a small gathering of local veterans and supporters, a preview of Compass House before its official opening. Among them was Dr. Eliza Chin, the VA psychiatrist who'd become both my therapist and friend. "How does it feel?" she asked, observing me greeting guests with growing confidence. "To transform something painful into something purposeful." I considered her question, watching the mix of civilians and veterans connecting over shared meals and conversations. "It feels like coming home, not to a place, but to myself." Later, as twilight settled over the mountains, I found a quiet moment to visit my mother's grave. I'd had her simple marker replaced with one that told more of her story. Helen Marie Sullivan Carter, beloved mother, educator, and persistent light. "I wish we'd had our time together," I told her, placing fresh flowers beside the stone. "But I'm using what I learned from you, through your letters, your friends, your persistence, to help others find their way. I think you'd approve." The Christmas that had marked my lowest point was approaching again, but this time, I would celebrate surrounded by chosen family, Grandpa, my veteran friends, my mother's former colleagues, and even Caitlin, tentatively rebuilding a relationship on honest ground. My father would not be among them. Perhaps someday I would be healed enough to consider limited contact, but that day remained distant. True reconciliation required acknowledgement and remorse he seemed incapable of offering. As December approached, I received an unexpected letter from Troy, Caitlin's ex-boyfriend who had witnessed my humiliation at that fateful Christmas dinner. "I've enlisted in the Army," he wrote. "Your dignity that night, and everything I've learned about your service since, showed me what real strength looks like. I want to thank you for that example." His words reminded me that even our darkest moments can illuminate paths for others in ways we never anticipate. The first snow fell early that year, blanketing Compass House in pristine white. Standing on the porch, watching other veterans help Grandpa string holiday lights, I felt a completeness that had nothing to do with perfect circumstances and everything to do with authentic connection. The compass pendant rested against my heart, no longer a reminder of what I'd lost, but a guide toward what I was building. My mother had intended it to help me find my way, and finally, after detours through war zones, betrayal, and grief, I had. So, what about you? Have you ever had to rebuild after betrayal by someone you trusted? How did you find your way forward? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience and transformation. Remember, sometimes the most difficult journeys lead to the most meaningful destinations. Thank you for joining me on mine.